This story is titled, Mom and Dad Forced Me to Pack My Belongings and Kicked Me Out, so I secretly purchased their apartment, increased their rent, and now they're begging for forgiveness and financial help. Hey Reddit, I'm 23 years old and currently trying to get my degree while working part-time at this rundown grocery store that barely pays enough to survive. The job is soul-crushing, but it's the only one that would work with my class schedule. Every paycheck feels like a cruel joke considering how hard I work. My parents, Richard and Nancy, have always been the type to breathe down my neck about everything. They act like my life belongs to them rather than me. It's suffocating. They've constructed this perfect picture in their heads of how my life should turn out, and they aren't shy about pushing me toward it every single day. The constant pressure makes it hard to even think about what I actually want for myself. They're convinced they know what's best for me, but the truth is, they have absolutely no clue what I actually want or who I really am. It's like they're directing a movie of my life without ever asking if I want to play the lead role they've written. One night, we were sitting at the dinner table on a regular Tuesday evening. I was trying to quietly eat the burnt lasagna my mom had made. It was like chewing on a roof tile, but I wasn't about to say anything. They'd somehow find a way to turn even a simple comment about dinner into another lecture about how ungrateful I am for everything they've done. Out of nowhere, my dad spoke up with his usual fake concerned voice. How's that marketing degree going? I knew this conversation was inevitable, but that didn't mean I was prepared for it. My heart immediately started racing, and I could feel my stomach drop. The dread was overwhelming, but I realized I had to rip off the Band-Aid sooner or later. I carefully put my fork down, staring at the pile of carrots I'd been pushing around my plate like a child. About that, I started, my voice a little shakier than I wanted it to be. I've been thinking about switching majors. The room went completely silent. You could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, each second stretching out painfully. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I was in for a storm. Switching majors? My dad practically spat his food out. His face turned this weird shade of red that only ever appeared when he was seriously angry. I'd seen that color too many times growing up, and it never signaled anything good. Yeah, I want to switch to computer science, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite feeling like I was standing in front of a firing squad. I'd been interested in programming for years, but I'd never had the courage to tell them until now. Before I could even finish explaining my reasons, my mom jumped in with her usual condescending tone. Charlie, thinking's never been your strong suit, she said with a tight smile, as if she was making some lighthearted joke. But we all knew she wasn't. That's how she always got her digs in, wrapped in a fake laugh or a so-called joke that was actually a thinly veiled insult. I just sat there swallowing the anger that was bubbling up inside me. I wanted to yell at them, to tell them they were wrong about me, that I was capable of making my own decisions. But I knew better than to escalate. That would just lead to more yelling, and I wasn't in the mood for a full-blown argument that would leave me emotionally drained for days. But my dad wasn't done yet. He slammed his fork down on the table so hard it made the plates rattle. The sound echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. Computer science? Are you out of your damn mind? He growled, his voice rising with each word. Marketing is what's going to make you money. You're throwing away your future on some stupid hobby. I tried to explain my perspective, hoping they might understand if I could just make them see how passionate I was about this. It's not a hobby, Dad. I'm really into it, and I think I could be good at it. I wanted to tell him about all the coding tutorials I'd been working through, the small projects I'd built on my own time, how the logical problem-solving just clicked for me in a way marketing never had. You think? He cut me off again, emphasizing the word like it was absurd that I would have any insight into my own abilities. Passion doesn't pay the bills, Charlie. You're being reckless. You need to think about your future, not just whatever you feel like doing right now. My mom nodded along with every word, of course. She always took his side, adding fuel to the fire whenever she could. You're not a child anymore, she chimed in. You don't just get to play around with your future. That's when it really hit me. They didn't care about what I wanted. Not one bit. To them, I was just this project they were working on, this investment they expected returns from. Any deviation from their grand plan meant I was screwing everything up. They didn't even stop to consider that maybe, just maybe, I knew what was best for me. That I had spent months researching this decision, weighing the pros and cons, looking at job prospects and growth potential in both fields. After dinner, I went up to my room, slammed the door shut, and collapsed on my bed. I felt like a weight was pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The walls of my childhood bedroom suddenly felt suffocating, covered in achievements and accolades that reflected what my parents wanted, not who I was. I pulled out my phone and called Julia. She was the only person who truly got it, who understood what I was going through. We'd been friends since freshman year, and she'd witnessed firsthand how my parents micromanaged every aspect of my life. "How'd it go?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Like a freaking disaster," I muttered, rubbing my eyes, which were starting to burn with exhaustion. They totally freaked out when I told them. It was like I just told them I was dropping out to join a circus or something. She sighed on the other end of the line. I could picture her shaking her head, that concerned look she always got when we talked about my parents. "Charlie, you've got to stand up for yourself. This is your life, not theirs. You don't owe them anything." I know, but they're my parents, you know?" "It's not that easy," I replied, feeling torn between the obligation I felt toward them and the growing need to break free. They had paid for my education until now, put a roof over my head, fed me. But did that give them the right to dictate every choice I made? "I get it," she said softly, her voice gentler now. "But you're 23, Charlie. You're not a kid anymore. You've got to start living your own life, or they're going to keep running it for you." I sat there staring at the ceiling, letting her words sink in. The glow-in-the-dark stars I'd put up when I was 12 still faintly glowed above me, remnants of a time when I still believed I could reach for what I wanted. Julia was right. I was an adult now, and it was about time I started acting like one. The next day I woke up feeling a strange mix of dread and determination. I had barely slept, tossing and turning all night as I rehearsed what I would say to them. I knew I had to tell them for real this time. I couldn't just keep letting them decide my life for me. This was it, my moment to take a stand. So I walked downstairs, my heart pounding so hard in my chest, I thought they might hear it from across the room. I found them sitting in the living room watching some mindless morning show, coffee mugs in hand, looking perfectly content in their bubble where everything went according to their plan. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted but firm enough to get their attention. My dad muted the TV with a sigh, like I was interrupting something important. They both looked at me with that expectant gaze, like they were waiting for some big announcement. And in a way, I guess it was. "I've made my decision. I'm switching to computer science," I stated, trying to keep my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my body. My dad's eyes narrowed dangerously. I could see the muscles in his jaw tighten, a warning sign I'd learned to recognize over the years. "No, you're not," he replied, his tone flat and final, as if that was the end of the discussion. I stood my ground this time, though. Julia's words from last night echoed in my head. "Yes, I am. I'm an adult, and this is my choice." I was surprised by how confident I sounded, even as my hands trembled at my sides. For a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd back off this time. That they'd see I was serious and respect that I was making a decision for myself. A glimmer of hope sparked inside me that we could move past this, that they'd support me even if they didn't agree. But then Mom stood up, crossing her arms over her chest defensively. Her face hardened into that cold mask she wore whenever I disappointed her. "If you're such an adult, then you can support yourself," she said, her voice as cold as ice. "You've got 24 hours to pack your things and get out." I just stood there frozen, like my brain couldn't quite process what she was saying. The room seemed to tilt around me. "What?" I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "You can't be serious." "Oh, we're serious!" my dad growled, rising from his chair to stand beside my mother, a united front against their own child. "You want to make your own decisions? Fine. But you're doing it on your own." I don't even remember walking back to my room. It's like I just teleported there, my body on autopilot while my mind reeled from what had just happened. All I remember is the overwhelming feeling of betrayal that washed over me in waves. It felt like they'd been waiting for an excuse to kick me out all along. I was their kid, their son, and they were just tossing me out like I meant nothing. Over a college major. A decision that should have been mine to make from the beginning. I called Ryan, my best friend since high school, the second I got back to my room. I didn't even bother to keep my voice steady anymore. What was the point? My world was crumbling around me. "Dude, they kicked me out," I said, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "I don't know what to do." Without missing a beat, Ryan replied, "Pack your stuff, man. You're staying with me." His immediate support was like a life raft in the middle of a stormy sea, as I threw my clothes into a duffel bag, grabbing only what I couldn't live without. It finally hit me with full force. I was homeless. My own parents had thrown me out like I was garbage. But at the same time, as messed up as it sounds, a part of me felt relieved. For the first time in my life, I wouldn't be under their control anymore. I was free. But I had no idea what that really meant yet. I didn't know that freedom came with its own price tag, one that I wasn't sure I could afford. The next few days after getting kicked out were a complete blur. I was crashing at Ryan's apartment, trying to get my head straight, but it felt like everything in my life had just been flipped upside down. One minute I'm arguing with my parents over my major, and the next I'm homeless. It didn't even feel real, like it was happening to someone else, not me. Ryan's place was fine, don't get me wrong. He lived in this tiny one-bedroom apartment that smelled like old pizza and gym socks, but I couldn't really complain. I had a roof over my head and a friend who wasn't about to ask me to leave. But man, it was cramped. I was sleeping on his ratty old couch that squeaked every time I moved, and we were practically stepping over each other in the mornings as we got ready. I didn't have a choice, though. I wasn't about to go crawling back to my parents and beg them to take me in. That wasn't happening. I tried to focus on my classes, but it was almost impossible. Every time I sat down to do my assignments, my brain would just drift off, thinking about what happened. It was like my mind wouldn't let me forget for even a second that I didn't have a real home anymore. The weight of it all kept pressing down on me, making it hard to concentrate on anything else. And then, of course, there was the money problem. My savings were already draining fast, and I didn't have enough to make it long if I wasn't working more hours. But with classes and trying to figure out where my life was going, it wasn't like I could just pick up a second job without something else giving way. Julia kept trying to be supportive, calling and texting to check on me. But even she couldn't fix the mess I was in. I remember one day she called me up, telling me we should go get lunch, try to take my mind off things for a bit. We ended up at this cheap sandwich shop down the street from Ryan's place. I hadn't been eating much since I left home, so I figured it might help to get out for a bit. "So, how are you holding up?" she asked, biting into her sandwich, her eyes watching me carefully over the table. I shrugged, picking at my own food without much appetite. "Honestly, not great. I can't focus on school and my money's running out fast. I don't know how long I can keep this up." She gave me that sympathetic look, the one I'd been getting from pretty much everyone since I told them what happened. I was starting to hate that look. It made me feel pathetic. "You're doing the best you can, Charlie. This isn't the end of the world, okay? It's just a bump in the road," she said, trying to sound encouraging. I laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was hollow, bitter. "Yeah, a bump the size of a mountain." She reached across the table and grabbed my hand, her fingers warm against mine. "You'll figure this out. I know you will. You've always been smart, even if your parents don't see it." Her words were nice, comforting even, but they didn't change the fact that I was stuck in a situation I didn't know how to get out of. It felt like no matter what I did, I was just treading water, trying not to drown. Every day was a struggle to keep my head above the surface. After lunch, I headed back to Ryan's and tried to focus on my assignments. But the more I stared at the computer screen, the more I realized how far behind I was falling. My grades were slipping, and the thought of dropping out was creeping into my mind more and more. I didn't want to do it. Giving up on college felt like admitting defeat, but it felt like I was running out of options. I couldn't juggle everything. I was barely keeping my head above water as it was. A few weeks passed, and things didn't get any better. My savings hit rock bottom, and I knew it was only a matter of time before I had to make a decision. Ryan could only cover for me so much, and I wasn't going to keep freeloading off him forever. He never complained, but I could see the strain it was putting on him too. His apartment wasn't meant for two people, and our friendship was being tested by the close quarters and the stress of my situation. The day I dropped out of college was one of the worst days of my life. It felt like I was admitting defeat, like I was giving up on everything I'd worked for. My parents' voices echoed in my head, telling me I was a failure, that I couldn't make it on my own. And in that moment, as I signed the paperwork in the dean's office, it felt like they were right. I remember sitting in the dean's office, signing the paperwork, and feeling like a complete failure. I'd always thought I'd be the first person in my family to finish college, but now that dream was slipping away, just like everything else. As soon as I walked out of that office, it hit me hard. I was on my own with no degree, no solid plan, and barely any money. The weight of that realization nearly crushed me as I walked across the campus for what felt like the last time. That night, I sat on Ryan's couch staring at my phone, wondering what I was going to do. The screen's blue light illuminated my face in the darkened living room as I scrolled through job listings that all seemed to require experience I didn't have, or a degree I'd just abandoned. Julia called as she always did, checking in on me. "So, what's the plan now?" she asked softly, her voice careful, like she was afraid I might break if she pushed too hard. "I don't know," I admitted, running my free hand through my hair. "I'm looking for more work, but nothing's coming through. It's like every door is closing in my face." There was a pause on the other end, and I could tell she was trying to come up with something to say. Something that would make me feel better. Something that would fix this mess I was in. "You're not giving up, right?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have a choice," I said, trying to keep my voice steady even as I felt myself starting to crack. "I dropped out today." "Oh, Charlie," she whispered, and I could hear the concern in her voice. "I'm sorry, but this isn't the end. You'll find something. I know you will." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to so badly. But it was getting harder to stay hopeful when everything seemed to be falling apart around me. I spent the next few days pounding the pavement, applying to every job I could find. I went from retail shops to restaurants, from office buildings to construction sites. I filled out applications until my hand cramped, called every lead until my phone battery died, but nothing stuck. The rejections piled up, each one chipping away at what little confidence I had left. The only place that offered me anything was West Side Diner, a greasy spoon that felt like it hadn't been cleaned since the 80s. It wasn't exactly my dream job. Hell, it wasn't even close, but it was better than nothing. They needed someone to flip burgers and mop floors, and I needed money. So I took it without hesitation, grateful for any lifeline I could grab. The hours were brutal, and the pay was terrible. I spent my days covered in grease, slapping burgers onto the grill while my manager Greg barked orders at me like I was in boot camp. He was a gruff, no-nonsense guy who didn't seem to care about anything but the bottom line. But at least he noticed when I worked hard, which was more than I could say for most people in my life at that point. After about a month at the diner, Greg pulled me aside during a slow shift. I was wiping down the counter, my uniform stained with various condiments, and my feet aching from standing for 8 hours straight. "Kid, you've got a decent work ethic," he said, crossing his arms over his chest. "You interested in picking up some extra hours?" I wiped the sweat off my forehead with my forearm, trying to look interested but not desperate, even though desperation was exactly what I was feeling. "Yeah, sure, what's up? I got a buddy who needs a night guard at this office building downtown. Pays better than here. You in?" He said it casually, like he was offering me a stick of gum rather than a potential lifeline. I didn't even have to think about it. "Yeah, I'm in," just like that. I was working 2 jobs, flipping burgers by day and guarding an empty building by night. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't what I'd planned for my life, but it was something. At least I was making enough to start paying Ryan for my share of the rent and food. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, and most nights I was running on fumes, barely able to keep my eyes open. I'd catch a few hours between shifts, sometimes napping in the break room at the diner or in the security office at the building, but it was never enough. My body ached constantly, and dark circles formed permanent residence under my eyes. But I had no other choice. I had to survive. Julia kept sending me links to tech internships, trying to help me get back on track with my original plan of studying computer science. She never gave up on that dream for me, even when I was too exhausted to think about it. But I just didn't have the time or energy to apply. My life was all about survival now. It wasn't about chasing dreams or passions anymore. It was about keeping my head above water day by day. Every night as I sat in that dark, empty office building, staring at the flickering lights of the city outside through dusty windows, I couldn't help but wonder how the hell my life had turned out like this. Just a few months ago, I had plans, dreams, and a future that seemed certain. Now I was just trying to get by one shift at a time. And the worst part was, I didn't see a way out. The jobs barely covered my expenses, and there was no room for saving or planning ahead. I was trapped in a cycle of work and exhaustion with no end in sight. Working 2 jobs was hell, straight up. No other way to describe it. The diner was greasy and chaotic, constantly filled with demanding customers and the suffocating smell of fried food. The night shifts at that empty office building were mind-numbing in a completely different way. The silence and solitude gave me too much time to think about how far I'd fallen. I was running on like 4 hours of sleep most days, drinking energy drinks like they were water, and basically living out of a beat-up backpack that I took everywhere. My whole life had been reduced to whatever could fit in that bag, a constant reminder of how temporary my situation had become. But at least I had some money coming in. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. Ryan didn't say it, but I think he was relieved when I could start pitching in for rent. I didn't want to be that guy, freeloading off my best friend while my life fell apart around me. So I made sure to hand him whatever I could whenever I got paid. I was still crashing on his couch, but at least now I wasn't a total burden. Then, out of nowhere, things started to shift. I don't know if it was dumb luck or the universe finally giving me a break, but one day while I was flipping burgers at the diner, this guy came in for lunch. I didn't think anything of it at first, just another random customer in a sea of faces that blended together after weeks of serving the same greasy food. He looked kind of tired, like the rest of us who worked too many hours for not enough pay. He ordered the lunch special and sat at the counter, occasionally glancing at his phone while he ate. Nothing out of the ordinary. After his meal, he came up to the counter to pay, and as I handed him his change, he glanced at the computer screen I had opened behind the register. I'd been working on some coding exercises during my break, just trying to stay sharp, Keep that part of my brain working even as the rest of my life had gone off the rails. It was a small connection to the path I'd wanted to take before everything fell apart. The guy raised an eyebrow, seeming surprised to see code on the screen. "You into coding?" he asked, his voice kind of casual but curious. I nodded, trying not to seem too eager but feeling a spark of excitement at talking about something other than burger orders. "Yeah, I've been teaching myself, hoping to make a career out of it eventually." The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, like I was talking about someone else's life plan. Someone who hadn't dropped out of college and wasn't working two dead-end jobs. He chuckled, a hint of interest in his eyes. "Well, I might have something for you. My company's looking for entry-level IT guys. Nothing fancy, but it's a start." I blinked, not really believing what I was hearing. Was this guy serious? Or was he just making conversation? "Wait, seriously?" "Yeah." He shrugged like it wasn't a big deal, like he hadn't just thrown me a potential lifeline. "Send me your resume. I'll put in a word for you." He handed me his business card, and I swear my hands were shaking as I took it. It was like this tiny shred of hope had appeared out of nowhere, a small light at the end of what had seemed like an endless tunnel of grease and exhaustion. That night, I didn't even care how tired I was from the double shifts. I went back to Ryan's place, fired up my laptop, and worked on my resume. It wasn't perfect. There were gaps and a lack of formal education that made me cringe. But it was something. I shot the guy an email before I could overthink it, then tried not to get my hopes up. I'd been disappointed too many times in the past few months to let myself believe this could actually lead somewhere. A few days passed, and I didn't hear anything back. Part of me figured the guy was just being nice, making conversation with the sad-looking fry cook, and I'd never actually get a call. Hope is a dangerous thing when you've hit rock bottom. It makes disappointment hurt that much more. So I tried to forget about it, focusing instead on the mind-numbing routine of my two jobs. But then one afternoon, as I was sitting in that boring, empty office building during my night shift, my phone buzzed. I was half asleep in the security chair, trying to stay awake for another 4 hours until my replacement arrived. The sudden vibration nearly made me jump out of my skin. It was an email from that company. My heart started racing the moment I saw the sender's name. I stared at the screen for a solid minute, too scared to open it. What if it was a rejection? Could I handle one more disappointment on top of everything else? But when I finally worked up the courage to tap on it, it wasn't a rejection. It was an invitation to interview. I read the email 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating from sleep deprivation. But it was real. They wanted to meet me, to give me a chance. I couldn't believe it. I'd gone from flipping burgers and guarding empty buildings to maybe, just maybe, getting an actual job in IT. The interview wasn't anything fancy. I borrowed one of Ryan's decent shirts that was only slightly wrinkled and took the bus to the office, rehearsing answers to potential questions the entire way there. My stomach was in knots, and I kept checking my reflection in the bus window, trying to look more put together than I felt. It was a small startup, nothing flashy. The office was in an old converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and open floor plans, the kind of place I'd only seen in TV shows about tech companies. But it felt like a whole new world compared to where I'd been spending my time. The guy from the diner, whose name I now knew was Victor, greeted me at the door and introduced me to his boss, Olivia. Olivia was tough but fair. She didn't waste time on small talk, diving straight into questions about my experience. I was upfront about the fact that I didn't have a degree. There was no point lying about something they could easily verify. But I emphasized how I'd been teaching myself everything I could about coding and IT, often staying up late after exhausting shifts to work through tutorials and build small projects. I showed her some of these projects on my laptop, code I'd written during stolen moments of free time. She didn't seem too impressed at first, her expression neutral as she scrolled through my work. My heart sank a little, but I kept talking, explaining my thought process and how I'd solved different problems. Then she asked me to solve a problem right there on the spot, something technical I hadn't done before. She wanted to see how I approached new challenges, she said. I panicked for a second, my mind racing with doubts. What if I couldn't figure it out? What if this was my one chance and I blew it because I was too tired, too unprepared? But then I remembered all those late nights I'd spent teaching myself, working through coding challenges just for the hell of it, pushing myself even when I was exhausted. I took a deep breath and got to work, trying not to let the pressure get to me as both Olivia and Victor watched over my shoulder. When I was done, Olivia glanced over my shoulder at the screen. She didn't say much, just nodded, and looked at Victor with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then she said the words that would change everything. He's got potential. Let's give him a shot. I didn't even know how to react. I wanted to jump up and scream, to hug them both, to call Julia and tell her the impossible had happened. But I just sat there trying to play it cool, even though I felt like my heart was about to explode out of my chest. This was it, my chance to get out of the cycle I'd been trapped in, to start building something real. I started the next week as an entry-level IT guy. It wasn't glamorous, mostly troubleshooting basic tech issues and doing grunt work that no one else wanted to handle. But I didn't care. For the first time in months, I wasn't flipping burgers or guarding some creepy office building at 3 a.m. I was actually doing something I loved, something that challenged me and made me feel useful. Olivia and Victor were patient with me, showing me the ropes and guiding me through the company's systems. But they also pushed me to keep learning, challenging me with increasingly complex tasks. They didn't hold my hand through everything, expecting me to figure things out on my own when I could. And that's exactly what I needed. Not coddling, but the right balance of support and independence. Nights were still rough, though. I was still juggling both jobs for a while, just to make sure I didn't screw up this opportunity. I couldn't afford to quit either job until I was certain the IT position would work out. So I'd work at the startup during the day, then head straight to the diner or the office building after. My schedule was insane. Work, sleep for a few hours, work again, repeat. Sleep was still a rare luxury, and most mornings I'd wake up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, every muscle aching from exhaustion. Julia stuck with me through it all. She was my rock, my constant source of encouragement when things got tough. Always sending me job links, checking in on how things were going at the startup, bringing me coffee when she knew I'd been up all night. I don't think I'd have made it without her steady presence in my life. Every time I felt like I was about to fall apart, ready to give up and accept that this was all too much, she'd remind me that I was doing this for a reason, that I was building something for myself, something that could lead to a better future. After a few months of grinding like this, I finally reached a breaking point. My body couldn't take it anymore. I was getting sick from exhaustion, making mistakes at all 3 jobs, and I knew something had to give. I couldn't keep working 2 jobs and expect to stay sane or effective at the startup. So I went to Greg, the diner manager, and told him I had to quit. He wasn't thrilled. Good workers were hard to find, he said, but he understood. He'd seen how I'd been running myself into the ground, how pale and exhausted I looked every shift. Good luck, kid, he said, giving me one of those rare moments of sincerity that broke through his tough exterior. You're a hard worker. You'll be fine. Coming from Greg, that was practically a tearful farewell speech. Walking out of that diner for the last time felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The smell of grease no longer clung to my clothes and hair, and I wouldn't have to endure another shift of demanding customers and aching feet. I still had the security job for the nights I wasn't at the startup, but at least I wasn't burning myself out as fast. One less job meant a few more precious hours of sleep. As time went on, I threw myself into the IT gig with everything I had. I spent every spare minute learning new skills, taking on projects that were slightly beyond my current abilities, and soaking up as much knowledge as I could. I read technical manuals during my security shifts, practiced coding problems during lunch breaks, and asked endless questions of anyone who would listen. I wasn't just trying to survive anymore. I was trying to build something real, something that was mine. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I doubted myself. When a problem seemed too complex, or when I made mistakes that felt so basic, I questioned whether I belonged in tech at all. There were moments when the voice in my head, which sounded suspiciously like my father's, would tell me I was wasting my time, that I should have stuck with marketing, that I was chasing a pipe dream. But every time I got through a challenge or solved a problem that had stumped me for hours, I felt that spark again, that fire of accomplishment and passion that had been missing for so long. And slowly, bit by bit, I started to see a future for myself again. Not the future my parents had planned for me, but one that I actually wanted. One I had fought for and earned through my own efforts. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. A few months into the new job, things started to feel different. Not in a bad way, just in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I was finally doing something I actually enjoyed, and I wasn't dragging myself out of bed just to survive another day at some dead-end job. The whole IT thing, coding, troubleshooting, building systems, yeah, it wasn't glamorous by most people's standards, but I liked it. And more importantly, it was mine. Something I had worked my butt off to get. Something I had chosen for myself despite everyone telling me it wasn't the right path. I remember sitting at my desk one afternoon, buried in some code I was trying to debug. I'd been staring at the same function for hours, trying to figure out why it wasn't working properly. My eyes were starting to blur from concentrating so hard when my boss Olivia walked over. She wasn't the type to beat around the bush, which I respected about her. No fake pleasantries or meaningless small talk. She leaned on the edge of my desk and said, "Charlie, I've been watching your work these past few months. You've got potential, but you're holding back." I blinked at her, completely caught off guard by her directness. Holding back? What do you mean? I wasn't slacking off. If anything, I was working harder than most people in the office, staying late, taking on extra tasks. She crossed her arms, giving me that look like she already knew the answer, but wanted me to say it out loud. "You've got the skills, but you're playing it safe. I see you sticking to what you know, not taking risks, not pushing yourself. You're comfortable, and that's fine. But comfort doesn't get you anywhere in this business." I didn't know what to say at first. She wasn't wrong. Since landing the job, I'd been so grateful to have stability that I'd focused on doing what was expected of me, not messing up, proving I belonged there. I guess after everything that had happened, I was just happy to be in a stable place for once, and I didn't want to screw it up by overreaching. "Look," Olivia continued, her tone firm but not unkind. "You're good, Charlie, but if you really want to stand out, you need to step it up. Take on projects that scare you a little. That's how you grow." I nodded, still processing what she'd said. It wasn't like I hadn't heard something similar before. Teachers, coaches, even my parents had given me variants of the "you're not living up to your potential" speech over the years. But this time, it hit different. This wasn't some lecture from my parents about how I was wasting my potential on the wrong career path. This was someone who saw what I was capable of in the field I had chosen and was pushing me to be better at it. So I took her advice. I started volunteering for more complex projects, putting myself forward for tasks that intimidated me, things I wasn't entirely sure I could handle. There were definitely moments where I felt like I was in way over my head, staring at problems I had no immediate solution for. But every time I figured something out, that feeling of accomplishment made it all worth it. The fear of failure was still there, but it was increasingly overshadowed by the thrill of overcoming challenges. One day, Olivia assigned me this big project for a new client. It was way more responsibility than I'd ever had before. Designing and implementing a custom solution rather than just maintaining existing systems. Part of me was freaking out, convinced I'd fail spectacularly and confirm all those doubts I still carried around. But another part of me was excited. This was the kind of challenge I needed, the opportunity to prove to myself that I could handle bigger things. I spent weeks working on it, staying late at the office, coming in early, devoting my weekends to making sure every detail was perfect. My security job had to go. There simply wasn't enough time for both, but I barely noticed its absence. I was too absorbed in the project, too committed to making it a success. When I finally submitted the finished project, I felt like I'd just run a marathon. I was exhausted, but in that good way. Like I'd pushed myself to the limit and come out the other side stronger. A few days later, Olivia pulled me into her office. I sat down, trying to keep cool, but I was nervous. What if I'd messed something up? What if all that work wasn't good enough? The stakes felt so high. She didn't waste any time. Charlie, the client loved your work. They're moving forward with everything you suggested. I let out a breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding. Really? It seemed too good to be true after so many months of things going wrong. She nodded, a small smile on her face. Rare for her, which made it all the more meaningful. You did good. Keep this up and you're going to go far here. I walked out of her office feeling 10 feet tall. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. I wasn't just getting by day to day. I was building a future. I started to see possibilities that I'd never considered before. Advancement, specialization, maybe even leading my own team someday. The more I threw myself into my work, the more I realized how much I'd been holding back, not just in my job, but in life. It was like this fog had lifted, and I could finally see what I was capable of if I stopped letting fear hold me back. The voice in my head that constantly whispered about failure, that sounded so much like my parents, started to grow quieter, replaced by a newfound confidence in my abilities. It wasn't easy, and I made plenty of mistakes along the way. There were nights I'd lie awake replaying embarrassing errors or moments where I'd been in over my head. But each mistake taught me something, pushed me forward in ways that playing it safe never could have. Unlike before, when a setback might have sent me spiraling, I found myself getting back up and trying again with renewed determination. Around that time, things with Julia started to shift too. She'd always been supportive, my rock through the worst of times, but now she seemed proud of me in a way she hadn't before. Our relationship deepened as I became more stable, more sure of myself. We'd go out to dinner, actual restaurants now that I could afford more than fast food, and instead of me venting about my crappy jobs or money problems, I'd be talking excitedly about this new project I was working on or some cool thing I'd learned. And she'd listen, really listen, her eyes lighting up as I gestured enthusiastically about technical details she probably didn't fully understand. It was like she could see I was finally on the path I was meant to be on, and her belief in me had been justified. One night we were sitting on her couch after I'd just finished a particularly brutal week of work. I was exhausted, but in a good way. The satisfaction of accomplishment rather than the empty fatigue of meaningless labor. She looked over at me with this soft smile on her face, the kind that made my heart skip a beat even after all this time. You know, she said softly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, I always knew you'd get here. Maybe not in the way you planned, but you're doing it. You're making it happen. I didn't know how to respond to that. I mean, she'd been with me through the worst of it, through the days when I didn't even know if I'd make rent or where my next paycheck was coming from. But she stuck around, never once making me feel like I wasn't enough, like I was failing, even when I felt that way myself. Hearing her say that, acknowledging how far I'd come, it hit me how lucky I was to have someone like her in my corner. Thanks, I said, my voice a little rougher than I meant it to be, thick with emotion I wasn't expecting. I don't think I'd have made it this far without you. She laughed, shaking her head like I was being ridiculous. You would have. You just needed a push. She leaned against me, her warmth comforting in a way nothing else was. You were always going to find your way, Charlie. Maybe she was right. Maybe I would have figured things out eventually on my own. But having her there, believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself, made the whole journey a lot easier to handle. She'd seen the potential in me long before Olivia did. Long before I did myself. Things started to pick up from there. Work got busier, but in a good way. I was taking on more responsibility, getting better at what I did, and people were starting to notice. My colleagues began coming to me with questions, seeking my input on projects, and Olivia kept giving me more complex assignments. Every time I finished one successfully, I felt more confident in my abilities, more certain that I belonged in this field, despite my unconventional path to get there. And the money, well, it was still tight by most standards, but compared to where I'd been, it was a dramatic improvement. I'd quit the security job finally, freeing up my nights and weekends for the first time in what felt like forever. While I wasn't rolling in cash, I wasn't worried about where my next meal was coming from anymore. For the first time in a long time, I felt stable, like I was on solid ground again, rather than constantly teetering on the edge of disaster. One afternoon, Olivia called me into her office again. I sat down, half expecting it to be another big project or perhaps feedback on my recent work. But she had this serious look on her face, one I hadn't seen before. It wasn't stern or disappointed. It was something else, something I couldn't quite identify. Charlie, I want to talk to you about your future here, she said, her voice calm but direct as she leaned back in her chair. I raised an eyebrow, not sure where this was going. Was I in trouble? Was I not meeting expectations? My stomach tightened with anxiety. Okay, I managed, trying to keep my voice neutral. She leaned back in her chair, studying me for a moment before speaking. You've done great work these past few months, and I think you're ready for more. I want to promote you to a full-time position. For a second, I just sat there, trying to process what she'd said. Full-time. That was the dream, right? No more probationary period. No more wondering if I was temporary. No more feeling like I was one mistake away from losing everything. This meant benefits, better pay, real job security. This was it. This. I don't even know what to say, I admitted, a grin slowly spreading across my face despite my attempts to remain professional. The magnitude of this moment was hitting me in waves. She smiled back, one of her rare, genuine smiles that transformed her usually serious face. Just say yes, and of course I did. How could I not? Walking out of that office, I felt this weight lift off my shoulders. All the stress, the sleepless nights, the self-doubt, it all seemed worth it now. I'd made it. Maybe not in the way I'd originally planned, but I'd made it all the same. And that felt pretty damn good. Getting promoted to full-time was like stepping into a whole new world. I mean, for the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. Not just for me, but for the people around me. I wasn't just a cog in someone else's machine. I was building systems, solving problems, creating solutions that helped the company and our clients. I didn't have to worry about making ends meet or whether I'd have to pick up some crappy side gig just to get by. This was it. Stability. But of course, life doesn't just magically get easy once you hit a milestone like that. Things at work got busier, like way busier than before. Olivia wasn't kidding when she said I'd be getting more responsibilities. I was thrown into bigger projects, leading teams for the first time, and managing deadlines that felt impossible at times. There were days where I'd look at my to-do list and just think, how the hell am I going to get all this done? But I pushed through. I had to. Every day was a challenge, but it was the kind of challenge I'd been waiting for, the kind that made me feel alive, made me feel like I was growing rather than just surviving. Even though I was still learning, still making mistakes, I was finally in a place where people trusted me to get the job done. That was huge for me after spending so long feeling like I had to prove my worth to everyone around me. One afternoon, Olivia pulled me into her office again. I swear, every time she called me in, I felt like I was back in school, waiting to see if I'd passed or failed a test. She had that serious look on her face again, and for a second I wondered if I'd screwed something up, if maybe I wasn't living up to my promotion. Charlie, I've got another project for you, she said, sliding a folder across the desk. The tension in my shoulders eased slightly. At least I wasn't in trouble. I picked up the folder and flipped through the pages, scanning the details. It was for a new client, some big company looking to upgrade their whole IT infrastructure. This wasn't just fixing issues or maintaining systems. This was designing and implementing an entirely new solution from the ground up. A huge project, way bigger than anything I'd worked on before. My stomach did that little flip it does when you're both excited and terrified at the same time. This is a lot, I said, trying to sound confident but not too cocky, aware of how much I still had to learn. Olivia nodded, understanding the weight of what she was handing me. It is, but I think you're ready. This is going to be a big deal for the company, and I want you to lead it. Lead it. Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. Me, in charge of something this significant. I mean, I'd been working hard, sure, but leading a project like this? That was next level. That was a vote of confidence I hadn't expected so soon. I won't let you down, I said, feeling the weight of what she was trusting me with. I know you won't, she replied, giving me a rare smile before getting back to business, discussing timelines and resources. The next few weeks were some of the most intense of my life. I was basically living at the office, working late nights and weekends to make sure everything was perfect. My team was great, talented people who knew their stuff, but the pressure was on me as the lead, and I wasn't about to let anyone down, not after how far I'd come. Julia was a saint during all of this. I wasn't around much, and when I was basically a zombie, exhausted, distracted, my mind still churning with project details even when I was supposed to be relaxing. She'd bring me takeout to the office when she could, sit with me for a bit while I worked, and remind me to take breaks when I'd been staring at my screen for too many hours straight. You're going to burn out if you don't slow down, she'd say, concern in her eyes as she noticed the dark circles forming under mine. She'd gently close my laptop or squeeze my shoulder, drawing me back to the present moment when I was getting lost in code and specifications. But I couldn't slow down. Not yet. This project was everything to me. It wasn't just about impressing Olivia or securing my position at the company. It was personal. I knew if I could pull this off, it would change things. Not just for my career, but for me personally. It was like I had something to prove, not just to Olivia or the client, but to myself. I needed to show that I could do this, that I could rise to the occasion, that taking a chance on me hadn't been a mistake. Maybe, in some distant part of my mind, I was still trying to prove my parents wrong too. To show them that this stupid hobby could become a successful career, that their vision for my life wasn't the only valid path. But mostly, I was trying to prove something to myself, that I was capable of more than just getting by. The night before the final presentation to the client, I barely slept. I kept running over everything in my head, double and triple checking the details, making sure there were no loose ends. I rehearsed my presentation until I could recite it in my sleep, anticipating potential questions and preparing answers. It felt like all the stress and anxiety from the past year had built up to this moment, and I was standing at the edge of something huge. Either I'd succeed and cement my place in this new life I'd built, or I'd fail spectacularly and confirm that nagging doubt that had followed me since I left home, that maybe I wasn't cut out for this after all. The next morning I walked into the boardroom, my heart pounding in my chest. The clients were all there, suits and ties, serious faces, pens poised over notepads to record any mistakes or weaknesses. I set up my presentation, trying to calm my nerves by focusing on the familiar routine of connecting my laptop and arranging my notes. But it felt like my whole career was riding on this one meeting, like everything I'd worked for could be undone in the span of an hour if I screwed up. Olivia was there too, sitting at the head of the table, watching me closely. I could feel her eyes on me as I prepared, not critical, but evaluative. This was as much a test for her as it was for me. She'd put her reputation on the line by trusting me with this project, by believing I could handle it despite my relative inexperience. I took a deep breath, reminded myself that I'd prepared for this, that I knew the material inside and out, and started the presentation. It wasn't perfect. I fumbled a couple of slides, stumbled over a few words when a particularly intimidating client interrupted with a question. But I kept going, recovering quickly, adapting when I needed to. I answered their questions confidently, explained the plan thoroughly, and showed them exactly why this upgrade was what they needed. I could feel myself growing more assured as the presentation went on, feeding off their engagement, their nods of understanding. And when it was all over, I stood there waiting for their reaction, my palms sweating like crazy. For what felt like an eternity, no one said anything. They just sat there, flipping through the documents I'd provided, whispering to each other, expressions unreadable. My stomach was doing backflips, and I was half expecting them to tear everything apart, to find some fatal flaw I'd overlooked. But then the head of their IT department spoke up. "This looks good," he said, nodding appreciatively. "We'll move forward with the plan." I couldn't believe it. I actually did it. I wanted to jump up and fist pump the air like a complete idiot, to call Julia immediately and share the news, to run out of the room shouting with joy. But I kept it together, nodding professionally like this was just another day at the office. Inside, though, I was screaming with excitement, relief washing over me in waves. After the meeting, Olivia pulled me aside, steering me into a quiet corner of the hallway outside the boardroom. The others were still filing out, gathering their things, making small talk. "Great work," she said, that rare smile back on her face. It wasn't the tight professional smile she used with clients, but something genuine, something warm. "You've earned this." I don't know what hit me harder, her praise, which she didn't give out easily, or the fact that I just pulled off the biggest project of my life. Either way, it felt like I'd crossed some kind of invisible finish line, one I'd been running toward for months without fully seeing it. All the crap I'd been through, the fights with my parents, getting kicked out, dropping out of college, working 2 jobs just to survive, it all led to this moment. It wasn't just about the success of the project. It was about proving to myself that I could overcome anything life threw at me, that I was stronger than the circumstances that had nearly broken me. That night, I walked out of the office, the weight of the past few months finally lifting off my shoulders. I didn't even care that I'd probably be back there first thing in the morning, working on the next thing. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. I called Julia on my way home, my voice full of excitement I couldn't contain any longer. "Babe, we did it! They loved the presentation! We're moving forward with everything!" She laughed, and I could hear the pride in her voice, warm and genuine. "I knew you would. I'm so proud of you, Charlie." Hearing that made it all feel even more real. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about everything I'd fought for, everything I'd sacrificed to get to this point. I wasn't the same guy who'd been kicked out of his parents' house, lost and scared and unsure of the future. I was building something for myself, on my own terms. The future didn't seem so uncertain anymore. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. And that feeling, that was worth everything. A few years after that big project at work, my life had changed in ways I never imagined. I'd gone from barely scraping by to climbing the ladder in the IT world. The small victories had turned into bigger ones. The entry-level position had evolved into a senior role. I'd become the go-to person for solving complex problems, for leading difficult projects, for mentoring new hires who reminded me so much of myself when I first started. And eventually, I made a decision that surprised even me. I started my own company. It wasn't an overnight thing, of course. I'd been working for a while, building up a solid reputation in the industry, saving up some money, and making connections with clients and partners who believed in my abilities. Eventually, I felt ready to take the leap, to venture out on my own rather than continuing to build someone else's dream. Starting my own business wasn't easy at first. There were sleepless nights reminiscent of those early days after I left my parents' house. Endless paperwork, tough decisions, and the constant fear that everything could crash and burn, leaving me right back where I started. But I had this feeling deep down that this was what I was meant to do, that all the struggles I'd faced had prepared me for this moment. So I stuck with it, grinding day in and day out with the same determination that had gotten me through those darkest days. Before long, things started to click. I began landing contracts, some small at first, then gradually larger and more significant. I built a small but solid team of talented people who shared my vision, who brought skills and perspectives I lacked. And the company began to take off, growing faster than I had dared to hope. After a couple of years, we were pulling in more money than I ever thought possible. I wasn't just making it anymore. I was actually doing really well. The little startup I'd begun with a handful of clients and a tiny office space had grown into a respected firm with a reputation for quality work and innovative solutions. I wasn't flipping burgers or guarding empty buildings at 3 a.m. anymore. I was running my own company, making decisions that affected dozens of employees, and watching it grow bigger every month. It felt surreal at times, like I was living in someone else's life, like this success belonged to a different person entirely. But it was mine. I'd built this from nothing, from the ashes of a life that had fallen apart when my parents threw me out. Around the time my company really started to take off, Julia and I began talking about buying a house. We'd been renting for years, living in a series of increasingly nicer apartments as our financial situation improved. But it felt like the right time to find something permanent, something we could call our own, something that represented the stability I'd fought so hard to achieve. We started looking at listings, visiting open houses on weekends, and dreaming about the kind of place we wanted to settle down in. Nothing too extravagant, we agreed, but something with enough space for us to grow into, maybe start a family someday. A home that would be ours in a way nothing in my life had ever truly been mine before. One day, I was scrolling through some real estate sites during a rare quiet moment at work, and I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. The house where I grew up, the one my parents still lived in, was listed for sale. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't spoken to them in years, had deliberately avoided keeping up with what was going on in their lives after how they'd treated me. But seeing that house for sale, those familiar rooms and that worn front porch displayed in professional photographs as if they weren't loaded with painful memories, it hit me in a weird way. I clicked on the listing and checked out the details, curiosity getting the better of me. Apparently, their landlord had decided to sell the property, and it was being listed at a price that was honestly a steal compared to other houses in the area. The old place needed work, according to the listing, updating the kitchen, replacing some windows, fixing the roof, which explained the lower price. And then, like a light bulb going off in my head, I had this wild idea. I could buy the house. At first, it felt a little petty, maybe even a bit vindictive. I mean, who does that? Who buys their parents' house after they kick them out? It seemed like the plot of some revenge movie, not something a rational adult would actually do. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense in a strange way. I was in a position to do it financially. They didn't know I had money or that I was even considering buying a house. This could be my chance to take back some control over a situation that for years had left me feeling powerless. So I called up my real estate agent, a friendly woman named Diane who'd been helping us with our search, and put in an offer. I didn't even hesitate. The price was right, and I had more than enough money to make it happen without breaking a sweat. Thanks to the success of my company, I could buy the house outright if I wanted to, no mortgage necessary. A few weeks later, after some back-and-forth negotiation that Diane handled on my behalf, the deal closed. Just like that, I was the owner of the house where I spent my childhood. The house I'd been thrown out of for wanting to follow my own path. It was mine now. Every creaky floorboard, every faded wallpapered wall, every memory-filled corner. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here's where things get interesting. The day after the sale went through, I got a call from the property manager who had been handling the place. I was in the middle of a meeting when my phone buzzed, and I stepped out to take it, thinking it might be something important about the house. Maybe an issue with the paperwork or an unexpected problem with the property. "The tenants are asking to meet the new owner," he said, his voice matter of fact. Apparently, they wanted to discuss the rent and some issues they'd been having with the house, repairs that had been neglected, concerns about the future of their tenancy. I smiled to myself, a surge of something between amusement and satisfaction washing over me. This was going to be good. I didn't tell the property manager anything about my connection to the current residents, of course. I just told him to schedule the meeting, already imagining how it might play out. The plan was already forming in my head, the perfect way to close this chapter of my life. When the day came, I drove to the house in my new car. Nothing flashy, but worlds away from the beaten-up old vehicle I'd had when I'd lived there. I parked out front, taking a moment to look at the familiar facade. The paint was more faded than I remembered, the front steps more worn. It looked smaller somehow, less imposing than it had been in my memory. Funny how time changes your perspective. I walked up the path and knocked on the door, my heart beating a little faster than usual. I'd rehearsed what I might say, how I might react. But now that the moment was here, I felt a strange mix of nervousness and anticipation. My dad answered the door. He looked older, grayer, the lines in his face deeper than when I'd last seen him. He looked surprised, but I could tell he didn't recognize me right away. It had been years since we'd seen each other, and I guess I didn't look like the same guy who left their house with a duffel bag and no real plan. I'd filled out, gained confidence, dressed better, the outer reflection of the inner changes I'd gone through. "We're here to meet the landlord," he said, looking confused, clearly expecting someone else, probably older, more stereotypically landlord-looking. "That's me," I replied, stepping inside like I owned the place. Which of course I did. The interior smelled the same, that peculiar mix of my mother's cooking, old furniture, and the lemon cleaner she'd always used. It was disorienting how familiar it all felt, despite the years that had passed. He blinked, clearly not expecting this. "Wait, what? You're the landlord?" "Yeah," I said, trying not to laugh at the bewilderment on his face. "I bought the place." At that moment, my mom walked in from the living room. When she saw me, her eyes went wide with recognition. "Charlie!" she gasped, bringing a hand to her mouth. "What are you doing here?" I just smiled and leaned against the wall, enjoying the moment more than I probably should have. "Well, I'm your landlord now." The look on their faces was priceless. They were completely speechless, just standing there in shock. I could practically see the wheels turning in their heads as they tried to process the fact that the kid they kicked out all those years ago, the kid they thought would fail without their guidance, was now the owner of their home. It felt like some kind of weird justice. The perfect closing of a circle that had begun the day they told me to get out. But I wasn't there just to gloat. I was there to handle business, to show them that I'd become someone they never expected me to be. Someone successful, someone in control. "So," I said, breaking the awkward silence that had fallen over us, "about the rent." They both stared at me, clearly not ready for what was coming next. "I'm tripling it," I said, keeping my face straight, not betraying the mix of emotions churning inside me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about taking back power in a relationship where I'd always been powerless. My dad's jaw dropped. "Tripling it? You can't be serious." His voice held a note of disbelief, as if this were some kind of joke or dream he might wake up from. "Oh, I'm dead serious," I replied, maintaining my composure. You see, property values have gone up, and I've got to make sure I'm getting a fair return on my investment. So yeah, the rent is going up a lot. I was using the same kind of cold, business-like tone he'd always used when explaining why I couldn't do something I wanted to do. My mom tried to reason with me, her voice shaky, hands fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. A nervous habit I'd forgotten about until that moment. "Charlie, we can't afford that. You know we can't." There was a pleading look in her eyes, something I'd never seen directed at me before. She'd always been the one in control, the one making demands. I shrugged, mimicking the indifference they'd shown when they'd thrown me out. "That's not really my problem. You can either pay the new rent or find somewhere else to live. It's up to you." The words came out colder than I'd expected, surprising even me with their harshness. But there was a certain satisfaction in throwing their own callousness back at them. It was harsh, I know. Maybe even cruel. But I wasn't going to back down. They'd made their choice years ago when they threw me out without a second thought, when they decided that their vision for my life was more important than my actual happiness or well-being. And now it was my turn to set the terms of our relationship, such as it was. They stood there stunned, probably realizing for the first time that they didn't have much of a choice. With their credit shot and housing prices what they were, they'd be hard-pressed to find somewhere else they could afford. They were stuck, trapped by the same kind of financial constraints that had nearly crushed me when they'd kicked me out. After a few minutes of awkward back and forth, them pleading, making excuses, trying to appeal to family bonds they themselves had severed, I told them I'd give them some time to figure things out. I handed them a formal notice about the rent increase, typed up and official-looking, and walked out the door. As I got into my car and drove away, I couldn't help but feel a weird mix of emotions. Part of me was satisfied, maybe even a little vindicated. I'd proven that I wasn't the failure they thought I'd be, that I'd made something of myself despite everything they'd put me through. That felt good, I can't lie about that. But another part of me felt empty, like I'd expected this confrontation to fill some hole that had been inside me since the day they told me to leave, and it hadn't. The satisfaction was hollow, fleeting. As I drove further from the house, I realized that no amount of rent hikes or property ownership could fix the damage that had been done to our relationship. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about letting go. I hadn't told Julia about buying the house or meeting my parents. It was something I'd kept to myself, not sure how to explain the complicated emotions behind the decision. But that night, sitting in our apartment, I told her everything. She listened without judgment, her eyes soft with understanding. "So what are you going to do now?" she asked when I'd finished the story. I stared at my hands for a long moment, turning the question over in my mind. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to go through with it, to make them pay, literally, for what they did. But another part of you knows that's not who you are," she finished for me, reaching out to take my hand. "You're not them, Charlie. You never were. That's why you've come so far despite everything." She was right, as she so often was. I wasn't my parents. I didn't want to be the kind of person who used power to hurt others, even those who had hurt me. That wasn't the man I'd fought to become. The next day, I called them and arranged another meeting. When I arrived, they looked nervous, tense, like they were bracing for more bad news. My father's jaw was set in that stubborn way I remembered from childhood arguments, while my mother's eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying. "I've been thinking about the rent situation," I began, sitting across from them at the kitchen table where we'd had our last major fight years ago. "I'm not going to triple it." The relief on their faces was immediate and visible, shoulders slumping, tension draining away. But before they could thank me or celebrate too much, I continued. "I'm going to raise it by a reasonable amount. Enough to cover the repairs the house needs and to reflect current market value, but not so much that you can't afford it." Their expressions shifted, relief tempered with uncertainty. This wasn't the pure revenge they'd feared, but it wasn't exactly forgiveness either. It was business. Fair, but not particularly generous. "There's something else," I added, my voice steadier than I expected. "I want you to know that I'm doing fine. Better than fine, actually. I have my own company. I design and implement IT solutions for businesses. That stupid hobby you thought would never amount to anything? It turned out to be a pretty lucrative career." I wasn't saying this to brag or to hurt them, though perhaps there was a small part of me that wanted them to recognize what they'd missed. The success they could have shared in if they'd supported me instead of trying to control me. Mostly, I just wanted to close that chapter, to lay out the truth so we could all move forward with clear eyes. My father looked down at his hands, his usual bluster absent. My mother's eyes filled with tears, though whether from regret, shame, or simply emotion, I couldn't tell. "We made a mistake," she said softly, the words catching in her throat. It wasn't a full apology, but from her, from them, it was significant. My father cleared his throat. "We thought we were doing what was best for you," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We were wrong." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak right away. After all this time, after everything that had happened, hearing them admit they were wrong affected me more than I wanted to show. It didn't magically heal the wounds of the past, but it was something. A crack in the wall that had stood between us for years. "I'm not here to fix our relationship," I said finally, needing to be clear. "I don't know if that's even possible after everything, but I'm also not here to punish you. The rent will be fair, the terms reasonable. What happens beyond that? I don't know." We talked a bit more. Awkward conversation filled with careful words and unspoken feelings. They asked about my life, my company, tentatively about Julia. I answered, giving them the outline but keeping the details to myself. Some things they hadn't earned the right to know yet. As I was leaving, my mother reached out as if to hug me, then stopped herself, uncertain. "Charlie, thank you," she said simply. I nodded again, unable to say, "You're welcome," because I wasn't sure what I was being thanked for. Not raising the rent to an impossible level? Coming back at all? Being successful despite their lack of faith in me? Maybe all of those things? Driving away from the house this time, I felt different. Not completely healed. Not fully at peace with the past, but lighter somehow. Like I'd set down a weight I'd been carrying for years without realizing how heavy it had become. When I got home, Julia was waiting, curled up on our couch with a book. She looked up as I entered, her eyes asking the question before she did. "How did it go?" I sat beside her, leaning into her warmth, her steadiness. "It went okay. Not great, not terrible, just okay." She nodded, understanding. "And how do you feel?" I thought about it, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions. "Free," I said finally. "I feel free," and I did. Free from the need to prove myself to my parents. Free from the anger that had motivated my initial impulse to buy the house. Free to build my life on my own terms, not in reaction to their rejection or in pursuit of their approval. I still owned their house and they still lived in it. Our relationship was still complicated, still damaged in ways that might never be fully repaired. But I had taken back my power not by hurting them as they had hurt me, but by choosing a different path. In the end, that was the real victory. Not the success of my company, not the money in my bank account, not even the irony of owning the house I'd been thrown out of. The victory was in becoming the person I wanted to be, not the person my circumstances might have shaped me into. So yeah, my parents kicked me out over a college major. They tried to control my future and ended up losing their place in it. Life took me on a journey I never could have anticipated, with hardships I wouldn't wish on anyone. But looking back now, from this place of strength and stability I've built for myself, I can almost be grateful for that painful beginning. It forced me to find my own way, to discover what I was truly capable of when pushed to my limits. And as it turns out, I was capable of a lot more than any of us ever imagined.